It likes to inform you of such a thing. And I think when people join, it'll inform them as well. Very happy to be returning to this forum of The Same Only Different, which we've done quite a few sessions over the years. And Woodlands Community Temple is really delighted to be connected and in fellowship with Peace Islands Institute of New York, and so grateful for the partnership of this tremendous organization and the beautiful people who are part of it. It is such a blessing that we're in each other's lives in this way. I'm really excited because, Imam, this is our first time doing this together.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm delighted that we can spark this new friendship and that we can learn from one another. Imam and I were saying that we chose quite a topic this evening.
Absolutely, yes.
We're going to do our best to bring you some learning about one another. What we're going to do is I will introduce myself and then give sort of the Jewish perspective on this area of fundamentalism. And then Imam will introduce himself and do the same. This came up because Peace Islands Institute and Woodlands are both pretty progressive spaces. And we look out into the world and we see the headlines and we see what our brethren are up to, what happens in the name of our religions. And we wanted to ask ourselves, how can this be and how do we deal with it? And how do our two communities go about wading into this territory and blazing a trail forward, even with everything that we see going on? Imam, is there anything you want to add before I plow ahead?
You are going wonderful. Just continue.
The encouragement is really,
Absolutely.
It's nice when we can take care of each other. All right. So first of all, I'm Rabbi Mara Young. I'm the rabbi at Woodlands Community Temple. We're in Greenburgh, New York. And if you can find Greenburgh on a map, I'll be really proud of you. We're somewhere in Westchester, because in Westchester, these things tend to not be too precise. Woodlands is a Reform Jewish synagogue, which is actually very relevant to this conversation because Reform Judaism is a liberal wing of the Jewish people. We are actually the largest in North America, not necessarily worldwide, but in North America, Reform Jews are the largest population. And the way that you know that we are liberal is because I am speaking to you as a rabbi, as a woman. That is one of the hallmarks that I'll kind of get to in a little bit. So we have a lot of thoughts and feelings when we see more extreme versions of Judaism operating out in the world. But I thought it would be helpful to begin with talking about the immense diversity within Jewish practice, because we need to first understand the roots of the diversity and the spectrum of Jewish practice that all Jews find themselves on, from the left, which is maybe more progressive, to the right, that's perhaps more strict. And if we can understand that diversity, we can then start to understand why some Jews operate in ways that feel just so out of bounds from what other Jews might think is within Jewish practice. Yeah. So I'm going to ask everybody to remain on mute just so that we can hear each other, or at least you can hear me, I guess. And we keep everybody on mute and we're going to move along. Okay. So talking about the diversity in Jewish practice, there is this thing called halakha, and halakha is Jewish ritual law. These are the customs and the practices by which a Jew is obligated to live on a daily basis. Halakha literally means the way, halach, to walk. And so a Jew's relationship to halakha is going to determine how they operate and how they interpret certain things. So even though there is Jewish ritual law as it exists, halakha, there are different interpretations as to how that manifests out in the world. So this leads to differing degrees of strictness and different practices altogether. So examples of halakha are the laws of keeping kosher, the laws of what you can and cannot do on the Sabbath, the role of women and what women can do. So those sorts of rules. But you have to ask, shouldn't there just be one halakha? Isn't there just one way, and either you stick to the path or you have veered from it? How can there possibly be diversity within what is considered mainstream Jewish practice? Well, because Judaism is all about discussion and adaptation, you have to begin with the different types of Torah. Different types of Torah. I thought there was only one Torah. Well, there is one written Torah by which Jews affix their learning, and it's the Torah that informs the lives that we lead. But within the heading of Torah, there are two different types. There's the written Torah, so the one that we read from every single week, the 5 books of Moses, right? That's the written Torah. But there's also something called the oral Torah, the spoken Torah. And that is Torah de Rabbanan, Torah according to the rabbis. And there's this fascinating thing from early in Jewish thought, after the destruction of the temple, that actually God speaks to us through these two different types of Torah, through the written Torah and through the oral Torah. And the oral Torah is exactly what it sounds like. It is passed down from generation to generation, and it gets written down every so often, but it changes and evolves over time. Now, it's fascinating to think whether the oral Torah, there's a discussion within Rabbinic Judaism of whether the oral Torah, the tradition that gets passed down from generation to generation, if we are uncovering Torah that already existed, or are we developing new Torah as we go along? And there's a whole debate about that. The benefit of having an oral Torah, in addition to the written Torah, is that it allows us to change our practice in such a way that we can adapt to any time and space in which we find ourselves. So, with all of that as a background, there is a quote from the rabbis that says, how should one engage with the tradition, with Jewish tradition? You should be deliberate in judgment. You should raise up many students, and you should make a fence around the Torah. And the fence around the Torah is the thing that I want to talk to you all about. Because the fence around the Torah gets developed in the oral law, in the oral Torah, this tradition that grew up with the Jews till today. And we've always had the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses as well. The fence around the Torah is this idea that we can create a barrier between the actual law and our practice in order to make sure that we don't inadvertently transgress the law. So if you have the law, the best example I can give you is you have the laws of keeping kosher. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. If you read that literally, the law is that you cannot prepare goat meat in the milk of its mother, right? The fence around the Torah is, you might not always be able to tell what type of meat it is. So the fence around the Torah is that you should never mix milk and meat, which is why chicken parmesan is not kosher. Because chickens don't produce milk. You're not actually transgressing the Torah by eating chicken parmesan, right? But you want to put a fence around it to make sure you don't inadvertently end up eating something that you shouldn't eat. So better to expand the law in such a way that you won't fall into that trap. There are many laws that are not strictly obligatory upon a person from the Torah, but they are instituted by the rabbis in order to prevent a Jew from transgressing the Torah law. But we have to ask, what exactly is this fence? How far out should it be? How high should it be? Is it possible to build a fence around the Torah so high that you actually no longer see the law that you're not supposed to be transgressing? And this is where a fascinating turn happens, where the rabbis say that the fear of transgressing one of God's laws is more admirable than just adhering to the law. The fear of transgressing the law is more admirable than observing the law. And what's come up with this is this idea that you should want to, at all costs, never stumble into transgressing God's law. And so you should create a set of rules around that law that helps you from ever even being close to transgressing the law. And this is where I think we see the making of extremism, the making of fundamentalism within Judaism, because how you build that fence, how wide it is, how tall it is a big part of this puzzle. I'm going to skip now because I'm going to leave time for the Imam, obviously. So this is where I think this differing practice and the plurality of Jewish practice lends itself to some people choosing to interpret or build upon the law in such a way where it might feel so far away from what was ever intended before. And that's when people start to use the law to justify some of their very difficult actions. We have a lot of examples of zealots in Jewish tradition. The most popular one that most people know are the Maccabees. The Maccabees from the Hanukkah story, right? Famously out in America, if you know anything about Jewish holidays, you probably know Hanukkah, and you probably know about the Maccabees. The Maccabees were zealots. They were rebel warriors who took control of the land of Judea, which is, now we'll just say the Holy Land, Israel, Palestine area. And it actually Hanukkah is a story of a civil war against the Jews. You had the Maccabees, who were zealots, who wanted a certain strict form of practicing Judaism, and they were fighting against more assimilated Jews at the time. They also were fighting the Greeks, who were forcing the assimilation. But they're kind of this early example. Zealots who were out there to prove a point about Jewish practice. There's also the zealots of the 1st century BCE. This was a political movement during the Second Temple Judaism times that sought to rebel against the Romans, also over in the Holy Land, but they weren't religious. The zealots in the Second Temple period, the Sicarii, that's it, Hassan. That's what we're talking about. They actually were not religious. They wanted control of the land, and they wanted political power, but it wasn't about espousing a particular religious belief back at the time. You'll notice that underneath a lot of what I'm saying now is access to the Holy Land. And I know this becomes a very touchy subject in any setting where you start to mention it, but I can't talk about fundamentalism, I can't talk about extremism without seeing how it plays out in the ancient land of Israel and Palestine and in the modern sense. Unfortunately, I think that what we see playing out in the Middle East is this continuation of not only religious extremism, but people wanting power, people wanting autonomy, people responding to trauma within the religion. It's very complicated. But what I will say is that We've been seeing on the news recently some real extremist actions being taken by Jewish settlers against Palestinians, and it's horrific. It's been condemned by many Jewish organizations. It goes to show that we still do have the responsibility to keep one another in check, even if the fences that we've built are so different. And if I am condemning the fence that somebody else has built, that we still have this obligation in today's world to speak to the people of our own faith as much as we can be heard, to say, you have built your fence too big. You've built your fence out of hatred, and that is not acceptable in our community. So while there's great plurality in the Jewish religion, and sometimes I can feel like the people on either side of me are wrong, they can feel the same about me. I do think it's important that we remain in conversation with one another and to realize that our tradition has always had the ability to move forward and to correct itself. And hopefully my prayer is that we will be able to do so. So I'm going to pause my spiel and I'm going to hand it over to the Imam.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi Mara, and thank you, Emre from Peace Islands Institute. Thanks for your invitation. As Rabbi mentioned, it's not an easy topic, but what we usually do in the interfaith activities is that we let the rabbi talk first, because they have to finish more than 5,000 years in 15, 10, and 20 minutes. And then we come as Muslims with around 1,400 years, which it becomes more easier. But also, Quran speaks a lot about the Jewish community. And we learn from the good Jews, the believing Jews, the good things, and we also learn from their mistakes. So we usually do this trick in conversations too. We'll let the rabbi speak first and then us. Dear brothers and sisters, in interfaith dialogue, I think that one of the important things is to first educate ourselves about our own religions, but also educate ourselves about the other religion. And that's why I think that one of the best fruits of dialogue is learning more about our own tradition, but also learning more about the other. And one of the most important things in a dialogue is the terminology, is the language we use. Sometimes we tend to, I was speaking with some Muslims, and I was saying that sometimes we do this mistake. We compare our texts with the practice of others. But we should compare our text with their text, and our actions with their actions. And also, we don't give the same value. We were not speaking the same language. For example, when a Christian brother or sister speaks about Jesus, it's not the same when we speak about Muhammad, peace be upon him, or the Jews speak about Moses. We all give different meanings to our prophets. We believe that God has decreed diversity. Diversity is not something that we discovered, something that we did. God created diversity. God created the free will. He gave us the opportunity to be different. And whenever there is diversity, there is a need to speak with the other, to understand the other. In Quran, there is a special name for the people of the book, for the Jews, for the Christians. They are called the people of the book. So all traditions, we have books, and we are all connected to the prophet Abraham. One area which I think it needs attention in the context of this dialogue is the terminology. It's important to know that, for example, the topic of today is fundamentalism. If someone would read just the topic of today's conversation, they would think, oh, probably they're speaking about Islamic fundamentalism, or probably they're speaking about Islamic extremism. Why? Because when we talk about fundamentalism now, usually it comes to our mind some news about some terrorists, some extreme and violent actions, usually done by Muslims. So this is the idea of fundamentalism that comes today. So even though the topic is hard, Rabbi Mara, I think I will add this topic in my interfaith activities, because I think it's important to clarify, especially some terms, if we would have enough time. Well, there is no term fundamentalism in Islamic theology. So if you will try to translate fundamentalism, there is no single word in Islamic theology, because as we know, this term fundamentalism is usually connected as the origin to the Protestant Christians, about a group of people which wanted to stay connected with the fundamentals of their religion. And one of those is the text, the idea, the rejection of commenting, of giving a meaning to the text besides the words. It was rejected especially by a group of Protestant Christians, and those were called fundamentalists, but not with a bad meaning, with a meaning that they were connected to the fundamentals of their religion. There are different scholars who reject the usage of Islamic fundamentalism with the meaning that is used today. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars, they usually reject the usage of term fundamentalism as it is used today about Islam, because this term, as I tried to mention, is a suspicious for the entire Islamic world, and not just those which I will try to explain. How do we see the extremism according to Islam? So this term does not quite apply to Islam or Muslims, and I believe in the way which is described today, it doesn't apply to any group of Jews or Christians or Muslims. But as soon as we redefine what does it mean, then we can agree on using such a term. For example, according to Bernard Lewis, which is a Jewish scholar of Islam, he states that it is now common usage to apply the term fundamentalist to a number of Islamic radical and militant groups, and he says that it remains an unfortunate and can be misleading. So Sayyid Hussein Nasr, who is a Muslim scholar of Islam, he states that as far as fundamentalism is concerned, use of the term by journalists, especially by the media and even scholars, to refer to a wide variety of phenomena in the Islamic world and currents in Islamic thought is most unfortunate and misleading, because the term is from a different context. I think working with terminology is important. As we know, one of the things that everyone agrees today is the sexist language, as the anti-feminist language which is used in different areas. And as we try to correct those mistakes, I think it's important to correct some misconceptions. I see it very important when a Jewish brother or sister, when a Christian brother or sister tries to correct a misconception about the other, about Islam, as I would do for the same for a misconception about Judaism or Christianity. What are the fundamentals of Islam? What are the basics of Islam? There is a verse which is considered as one of the most beautiful verses about this. God says, "It is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards east or west, but it is righteousness to believe in God and the last day, and the angels and the book and the messengers, to spend your substance out of love for him, for your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, for those who ask, and for the ransom of slaves, to be steadfast in prayer and practice regular charity, and fulfill the contracts which you have made, and to be firm and patient in pain or suffering and adversity, and throughout all period of panic. Such are the people of truth, the God-fearing. So these might be considered as the principles, the fundamentals of religion, of Islam. Sometimes when we talk about fundamentalism, so let's come to redefining what we're talking about. If we are talking about literalism, so people who would take the text and try to practice it literally, whatever they read, then of course Islam speaks about this. When we talk about extremism, of course Islam speaks about this. There's a verse in Quran, Surah Nisa, where God says, don't go to the extreme in your religion. There's also another verse where he says there is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fi din. So religion, Islam has different meanings. One is peace, salamah, but the main meaning, it's submission, submitting yourself to God. That's why, according to Islam, all prophets, they submitted themselves to God. So Moses submitted himself to God. Jesus submitted himself to God. Adam submitted himself to God. So when we talk about faith, it's not about forcing someone to faith. It's about submitting. That's why God says in Quran, there is no compulsion in religion. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he, I know I have like 8-9 minutes, 7 minutes, 500 years more.
You have as long as you need.
Yeah. So there's a saying from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he said, beware of extremism in religion, for it destroyed those before you. So we see, we do a prayer every day. We do like 40 times per day is the first chapter. And we pray to God to keep us on the middle way, on the moderation way, Sirat al-Mustaqim, on the right way. And that is kind of the ideal of every Muslim. That's why you will see Muslims sometimes from different schools kind of not accepting this word moderated Muslim. They would say, actually, we believe that Muhammad, if he would live today, he would be like this. So the way how we understand the text will determine the way how we perceive Islam and the way how we kind of expose it. I'll try to give 3 examples about three big scholars in Islam, and try to elaborate on different topics from 3 of them to give us an understanding that how this literalism, how this extremism might be dangerous first for the person itself. Let's not forget that first the first one who is exposed to faith is the person himself, and then to the society around them. One is Abu Hanifa. He lived in the 7th, 8th century. One is Badi'u Zaman Sayyid Nursi from Turkey. He lived on the last century, 20th century. And one of them is Fethullah Gulen, who is still living in this century. So Abu Hanifa, he is considered the pioneer of the school of the sound opinion of Ray. He was one of the pioneers who advocate seeking solutions to social judicial problems by using reason together with books. So let's not forget, there is Quran, the book of Quran. There is and I thank Rabbi Mara for explaining her perspective on the Torah. When we speak about Quran, we speak about 600 pages, literally letter by letter, not changed for 1400 years. So In Arabic, the text of Quran, the main text of Quran, it's not changeable. What's changed is the commentary of Quran. It is the understanding from a very wide Arabic, wonderful Arabic language, and we see scholars sometimes understanding way different things from the same verse. So when we see Quran, every Muslim believes, 99.9% of Muslims believe that 600 pages of Quran are the words of God, and they are not changed. But when we come on how we understand these verses, these words, then we have different schools. Then we have different scholars. Why? Because we see the commentary, the same verse with different meaning. So Abu Hanifa, he advocates that we should use our reason also when we read a verse of Quran. And he also says that we should use religious essentials and also scholarly comparisons, which is called qiyas, and it is called also a deduction by analogy. So making analogy and kind of not just reading the text, what says word by word, but also making some analogy. So if this happened in this time and this situation, what should I do in this time with this situation with the people in the time where we live? He also used deductive reasoning, which is kind of ijtihad, and also something called juristic preference for the better. So what would be a better understanding of the same thing? He also accepted the customs of a country, of a society, as soon as those customs are acceptable, are not in rejection with the main principles of Quran and Hadith. One of the things which makes him different, and especially for nowadays, I think is very important. He made a distinguish between faith and worship. So he did not believe that a person who sins, he would lose his faith. And I think this is very, very important, especially for nowadays and especially for today's society. And this is one of the things that happens when you literally kind of try to explain Islam, Quran, and the words of Prophet Muhammad. He says that even though we do sins, we commit sins, as soon as we believe in God, we are sinners, but we're still believers. There are some literal approaches to this, that if you sin, you might lose your faith, and this is kind of, especially for today, it might be not appropriate to the time where we live. He did this, let's say, 13, 12, 100 years ago. We come to Said Nursi on the 20th century. He described moderation. So we're not talking about modernity. We're talking about moderation. So being modern doesn't mean you are good or you are nice, but being moderate, that is a different concept, which I think we should be aware of. Sometimes people kind of tend to push people to be modern, like modern Muslim, but what a Muslim would seek is being a moderate Muslim. So someone who always is in the middle way. He says that moderation is an Islamic way of life which condemns any type of extremism, wastefulness, and fanaticism. So this, I think this is very, very important from the perspective of Said Nursi. And he says that Prophet Muhammad was created with the most moderate character and the most perfect form, and his action and rest all proceeded of moderation. And let's say, he says that his biography, so the biography of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, shows clearly that in all his actions, he proceeded with moderation, avoiding excess and negligence, and avoiding extremism. So as I mentioned, when we speak for a moderate Muslim, is someone who believes that today, Prophet Muhammad, if he would be living today, he would be a moderate, so he would be a Muslim, of course, but a Muslim in which we can explain today as a moderate Muslim, just to kind of understand the definitions, because those are important. So if Moses and Muhammad, peace be upon him, they would live together today, they would definitely work together. They would definitely do whatever they can to improve universal values in our society. When we come to Gulen, because I see I have last 2 minutes, I try to be careful with time, especially on Zoom, because it might be a good time to sleep. So when we come to Gulen, he speaks about so fundamentalism, but it's translated fundamentalism in English, but we talk about kind of a perspective of literalism, fanaticism. So he says that a fanatical and dogmatic adherence to a belief, it's not a good thing for a believer and his society. So Gulen makes this separation. He says that it's not the problem with the dogma, it's not the problem with the text, because they are divine. It is a problem with the way how we perceive, with the way how we read, and with the way how we understand, and with the way how we practice, or with the way how some people practice dogma. He states that within fanatism, one doesn't arrive at the position through discernment and growth on a spiritual journey. So he believes that fanaticism and extremism, it's kind of a shortcut which will not help you to grow spiritually. And if you don't grow spiritually, we're not speaking about a submission to God. We're just speaking of an imitation of something which you kind of do the appearance, but not the internal. He also calls this as inflexibility, or a militant inflexibility. So extremism will bring this militant inflexibility, and religious fanaticism will lead its followers to violence in the name sometimes on protecting itself. So let's not forget that a lot of people who fall on this way of understanding, they're not bad people, they're sincere people. A lot of people are sincere. They want to protect their faith, they want to improve their faith and their religion, but it's because this lack of spiritual growth which will not bring the desired fruits of faith and religion. So to conclude, it's a very sensitive topic. I hope I try to kind of remain on the topic, especially in modern times, where religion, it doesn't identify us as it identified 300 years ago. So 300 years ago, belief was a way of explaining the enemy, the other, or your own people. But today, belief, religion, it's not to identify, let's say, people or a state or the enemy or the other. Today, it identifies ourselves. And that's why it's important the way how we learn and the way how we practice religion. And it's important to continue our interfaith work. Thank you very much for listening, if you are listening, of course.
Oh, I know. I learned so much, and there are people in the chat asking for the spelling of names and things like that. And Hassan is putting in some links so that, you know, those of us that are less familiar can do some reading. I appreciate everything that you said. Folks, if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. I am going to highlight something that I have always respected and something I've learned from Islam, this idea of Islam meaning to submit, and this humility that is a part of it. And Imam, when you were talking about humility, I wrote the word down and I underlined it a few times, because I believe that's part of what we're talking about here, that what's at the heart of Muslim thought and what's at the heart of Jewish thought is humility. We are not God, right? We are in the image of the divine, however we define that, right? And we have godly sparks within us, whatever your language is. But ultimately, our traditions are speaking of finding that humility in who you are and what you bring to this world. And if we lead with humility, then actually we'll find ourselves on that moderate path, because we won't believe that we are better than the others within our own religion, or we won't think that our religion is better than another. And I think it's humility that brings us to this gathering, right? That like you said at the beginning of your remarks, that I have so much to learn from you, you have so much to learn from me. That's the broad you and the individual. And it's our humility that brings us to that. I think that if we can lead with that, we find ourselves in more productive spaces.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that interfaith work is also as a school for everyone, a school for the speakers, for us, and I believe in a humble way that is a school for the listeners too. We tend to look to each other with our own perspectives. We kind of learn to hear the other perspective. Where do they speak from? I think that the color of our glasses will define the color of the view that we see. So not forgetting this, I think it's important. It's we live in a time where we tend not to listen to the other. We don't listen to our spouses, we don't listen to our kids, we don't listen to our teachers, especially our spouses. I saw some some happy faces. So it's a time when, especially we talk about young generation as they don't listen, but I think that the older generation said the same thing for us. So usually when we don't listen, it's not just we don't understand, we don't even know what's happening on the other part. So I think that the more we listen, the more we will speak to ourselves. We'll hear this about our spiritual journey too, because we need that. We need that growth.
You know, you mentioned the definition of these words. Are we talking about literalism? Are we talking about the fundamentals? Are we talking about extremism? And you made mention of the media, maybe not directly, but that there's a certain kind of name that gets put out there for both of our religions, right? Absolutely. And, you know, I brought up the Middle East because I feel like as Jews, that's something that we are really contending with right now. And I wonder why you think, I am interested to hear your perspective. Why do you think the media is determined to raise up these more extreme factions of our religions, when you and I know that the everyday Muslim, the everyday Jew is actually a peace-loving person?
So I think that has an easy response. So we announced that we'll speak in a peaceful way, and we have 24 listeners. Let's announce that Rabbi Mara and Imam Ghazi, they will fight in the Walmart. So we will have 240 listens. So it is unfortunately not just media, but everything on 21st century is built on consumption. So whatever consumes, so it's not just religion, it's about art, It's about everything. It's about consumption. It's about selling, whatever sells more. And unfortunately, as we see on the a lot of people today, they don't read the article, but they go to the comments because there is where people fight. So a lot of people kind of express, I would say, express their spiritual emptiness in violence, because that's kind of a violence, like violating other on social media. It's an expression of our spiritual illnesses. The solution is not easy. It's a working more with ourselves, educating ourselves, educating more our people. So the more we invest in education, and education, not just in degrees, but education as a whole, the more we will grow, I think.
I also think the movements towards diversity education in workplaces is helpful in this regard to get the word out that when we say, like, someone is a Jew, that we actually haven't gotten the whole picture of what that means, because there's so much diversity within the Jewish community, same with the Muslim community, right? And if we can move to a place where people can want to dig a little deeper into what the perspective of that person is, what are the interpretations that they're latching onto, then maybe we can encourage one another to move past those headlines that speak so monolithically about our people, which is also part of the problem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think that we should go in person. So hopefully next time it will be in person instead of online, because this is, I think that COVID area will be a new challenge, even from a religious perspective. We'll have post-COVID people and pre-COVID people, post-COVID Islam and pre-COVID Islam, post-COVID religiosity and pre-COVID religiosity. So hopefully, let's pray that next time we'll be in person, Rabbi Mara.
I truly hope so. And I know that we have a hope that we'll be able to spend Ramadan together. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up COVID and being online. Been thinking, I saw an article in the Times about, it was from a Christian perspective, a woman saying, I really wish Zoom church would go away, because the point of religious gathering is to feel the presence of other people, and that actually religion, when done right, which might be an extremist thing to say, when religion, when done right, actually makes you a bit uncomfortable. It takes you out of your comfort zone and it challenges you. And in the Zoom space, it's very easy for it to become distanced and for someone to just be a passive watcher. Like, I went to services, but really I sat at my computer and I watched services. Did I actually think about the words? Did I actually have to sing the song in a way that moved my soul? It allows for that passivity. And I mean, I think I sound like an old fuddy-duddy when I say we do need to get back in person with each other, because that discomfort leads to growth within each one of us. Yeah. Do folks have any questions? We'd love to have a conversation with you too. There is a conversation happening in the chat, which is nice. Okay, so Amy, your Algerian son-in-law and your Iranian friends have told you that it was only when they came to America that they actually met Jews, and they were amazed to find that Jews and Muslims had so much in common. Can you talk about how being in America makes a difference here? Ooh.
So I am originally from Albania. My parents are still there. Albania is famous with its interfaith harmony, interfaith dialogue. but also with the only European country which the number of Jews were larger after the Nazis than before them. So we have something called Besa, the code of honor, and once you are under Besa, no one can touch you. So the Muslim families and the other families in Albania, they kind of protected all Jews. There are a lot of books and different articles about this. So for me as an Albanian, in a major way, I have Christian friends and different friends till I was there. But of course, here is different. You see this diversity in a more practical way. You have them in work. You have them at the shop. I am part of 3 amigos here in our area, a priest, imam, and rabbi. We go to church, to schools, to synagogues, to mosques, and to universities to kind of share our togetherness, because I think that people need to see our togetherness, to speak about our faiths. For example, tonight, it wasn't just speaking about our commonalities, which is usually done by interfaith work, but we went deep in our respective traditions. And I think this is important to kind of sharing our roots, speaking about our understanding of life, understanding of religion, and this will bring us more together. So definitely, the more we know different people from different religions, the more this will define the way how we understand religion. And it's part of, in my short presentation, Abu Hanifa takes this diversity, takes this customs of a place. He says that this should get examined whenever we try to practice our religious duties.
I think we have a beautiful opportunity that, like, what is the promise of America, right? The land of, golden opportunity. It's actually that, different types of people get put into conversation with each other more so than, in other countries where it's maybe more of a homogenous culture, right? That we get brought together through the immigrant experience, right? And having that common theme. I know I've been in a number of programs with Peace Islands where we've talked about the next generation, and you made reference of the next generation earlier, Imam, that something we also have in common is this fear or uncertainty, perhaps is a better way to put it, uncertainty of what's happening with the next generation. Are they falling from the umbrella of our faith? Are they becoming more secular? What will the next generation of our people look like? And we contend with the same anxiety about retaining the next generation, keeping them involved, and having their voice a part of what's happening. And so we end up finding those kinds of commonalities too, like the struggles that aren't necessarily theological, but the struggle to remain a people and to keep your tradition alive. And I sometimes it feels good knowing that we're not the only ones. Us Jews are not the only ones who are scared about assimilation and what's happening with kids these days.
Yeah, I usually say that we usually speak about our common values, but we will see how many common problems we have. So if a Christian father would come together with a Jewish father and a Muslim father, and they will speak about their high school kids, they will see speaking about the same things. So we share the same world. If you live in America, the same country, the same problems, the same challenges. So absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And one of
There's
the challenges is when we speak too much in Zoom. So I think we shouldn't
Yeah,
challenge
I think, Imam, I'm going to say thank you so much for participating
Likewise.
in this conversation. And I'm so grateful to all of our friends who have joined us here and what they shared in the chat. And Emre, you know, our fearless leader over here. I will always express appreciation for Peace Islands. I think Peace Islands Institute is really the movers and shakers, the ones driving this work every single day. And I'm so thankful for it. And I'm thankful for this new friendship with you.
And here it is. We're just building a new peace island. That's the idea. Having peace island.
Beautiful imagery.
That's the idea. God bless you.
All right, folks, thank you for being here this evening and being up late with us. And may you all go in peace and have a wonderful evening.
Salam. Salam, everyone. Shalom. God bless.